Welcome to History and Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Today, my dear friends, I'd like to focus on two questions. What is happening at the front line? An obvious escalation. And the second one, what do the Russians actually want? Which was explained quite well in the recent wildly publicized interview of Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov. And the overall theme or title of today's presentation, I would put it like this: From Denial to Panic, Zelensky and EU. So let's get back to the original question, the war update. What has been happening? And that's really dramatic because in the last 2 days, the Ukrainians have launched the largest ever attack on Russia with hundreds, close to 1,000 drones of various kinds. So that's significant because that shows that the Ukrainians want to show, Zelensky want to show to his people and to the West that Ukraine is fighting and Ukraine is capable to deliver huge number of missiles and drones, particularly drones, against Russian targets. Now I'll go over what has actually been achieved. And of course, in response, Russia has also launched hundreds of drones and missiles of various kinds in the last 48 hours. And that comparison needs to be done so that we have a clear picture as to what is hit, what is not hit, and how the exchange of fire is actually working out in real time. So one of the most important thing that the Ukrainians tried to do is to reach the Samara missile complex. That's the very important military target that produces intercontinental missiles. And this was a very brazen attempt from the point of view of the Russian, because this is strategic assets of Russia. So this, of course, means that Zelensky wanted to show to the United States and to those in Europe who want to hear this, that the message is we can reach to what nobody else can uh, without unleashing a nuclear war. We can hit the Russians where it hurts most, in their strategic assets and the production facility of intercontinental missiles. Now, obviously, how much was hurt and what exactly was hit is a state secret, so I have no idea. But the Ukrainians, but these sites are very heavily protected, so I doubt very much that the Ukrainians were able to penetrate much into the uh, top secret missile producing facility. And they at the same time hit Wildberries, which is the storage of um, of a company like Amazon that delivers all kinds of goods to everybody, and they hit it again, and that's a soft target, obviously not protected as others. What else needs to be said is that the Russian official count is that 822 Ukrainian fixed wing unmanned aerial vehicles were intercepted over not just one or two, but a whole lot of provinces: Bryansk, Vladimir, Volgorod, Voronezh, Kaluga, Kursk, Lipetsk, Nizhny Novgorod, Oryol, Rostov, Ryazan, Tambov, Tula, and Moscow region, which means this is all of central Russian provinces. So this was a barrage. And now of those, the vast majority were intercepted. Now let me pause on that, because this is important to see the statistics. Each one of those drones costs in the neighborhood of $200,000. Now that's 10 times cheaper than the Patriot missile that costs 2 million. So the Ukrainians essentially say that they have a relatively inexpensive weapon that can hit very far and make it painful to Russia, as they claim, to conduct the war. However, and this is the key point, the more sophisticated Ukrainian drones are, the faster they fly, and the more capacity, the more load, explosive load they carry, paradoxically, the easier they are to intercept by the Russians. That is key, because Russian defense system was designed to intercept intercontinental missiles and all kinds of other missiles from Europe, ATACMS and others, Tomahawks. That's what it was built. The S-400, S-300, S-500, all these defense systems were designed to intercept sophisticated, fast-flying missiles. And the closer Ukrainian drones approach this level, the easier they are to intercept. What the Russians had a hard time intercepting are the toy drones that carry like a grenade or a very small charge, 500 grams. And these were the ones flying over 50 meters from the ground. They were the ones that were impossible to intercept because they were unseen. And because if they were seen, it took a long time to mobilize something to stop them. And that's why the highly flammable oil facility was an easy target. But now that comes to an end because the Russians have created several layers of defense along the strategic defenses of military targets and of Moscow region. And this is why the Ukrainians now have no way to hit Moscow. Of 150 missiles sent against Moscow, one or two got through. This is why we see now that they're shooting at all kinds of cities, spreading the targets far and wide, so that their cheap uh, drones, low flying, could not be intercepted. And they are not intercepted, but those that get through essentially hit civilian infrastructure or civilians themselves. The vast majority of those hits were on individuals or transport or some easy targets in the provinces adjacent to the front line. Uh, so, um, Now, why is this going on from the point of view of trying to explain? Well, as I mentioned before, Zelensky cannot stop because he needs to show to those who give him money that he is capable, that he can still do something. But from the Russian point of view, what they kept saying all the time is that hitting civilian targets and apartment buildings and other uh, civilian targets, essentially from their point of view, is a act of state terrorism. And so what generated in Russia, as I mentioned before, is this kind of a public opinion outcry of rage that demands of Russian authorities to speed up the offensive and finish off Zelensky regime. So that's the point. If before the drone offensive, the Russians were willing to negotiate a compromise settlement with Zelensky regime, now this drone offensive destroyed this. And now what the Russians are doing is speeding up their hits. So pride, hatred, fanaticism, all of these things push Zelensky to self-destruction, because what the Russians are doing now is absolutely unprecedented, and this indeed is a new stage in the war. The way they're hitting the Ukrainian targets, and they are hitting them with missiles, including hypersonic missiles and including Gerain 4, increasingly sophisticated drones that fly ever faster and have ever more sophisticated navigation system, autonomous guiding systems of all kinds that make them more and more look like flying missiles. So the port infrastructure in Odessa and now in Izmail on Romanian border is essentially destroyed. The 7 or 8 cargo vessels that dared to come to Odessa are destroyed. The bridge, for the first time over the Dnieper River, was destroyed. Up to now, the Russians were reluctant to blow up the bridges again across the Dnieper River, presumably because they thought that that would complicate supply of civilians, or because they wanted to keep it for themselves. I don't know. But now they started destroying the bridges as well. So the way things are going, uh, there will not be much of industrial infrastructure of Ukraine left. This is a very, very serious moment that the Russians decided to finish off any capacity of Ukraine to hit Russia. And that means destruction of bridges, of ports, of industrial production facilities, of electrical grid facilities, which essentially means that Ukraine as a country would be reduced to ruin. The best thing that the Ukrainian leaders could do now is swallow their pride and accept the defeat and save what can still be saved of their industrial capacity and electricity capacity and so on. But they're not in any hurry to do it, at least not Zelensky. Now, there was a speech by Mr. Zaluzhny recently, and a few days ago, where he said something approaching his willingness, if he were president, to sign a deal with the Russians and accept defeat of some form or another. The problem is that the Russians are not going to sign it either with Zaluzhny or with Zelensky or anybody who have anything to do with this Bandera nationalist regime that just reburied again one of the Nazi uh, collaborators who was brought from Netherlands and reburied in Ukraine as a hero. That essentially means where the values of the current leaders of Ukraine are. So my prediction is that the Russian aim now is to um, destroy as much as could be destroyed until and unless Ukrainians agree to sign what Russia wants them to sign. This was elaborated in the speech, in an interview of Mr. Lavrov, the second topic today, where he essentially used the words that military effort should be much tougher, harsher, to dismantle everything the West machine, the war machine, has built. So he repeated what I argued along a while ago, that from the point of view of Russia, Kiev employs terrorist methods, and that Russia does not need to freeze the conflict, but to reach a long, as he put it, and sustainable settlement. So all of that is quite well known. He just repeated Russia needs a treaty. And that also answers the question of those that Russia wants to invade Europe and wants to go ahead and conquer Ukraine and then conquer Poland, then conquer Germany, and then conquer France. No, Russia doesn't want to conquer anything. It wants to have a treaty that Putin mentioned way back in December 2021 on the eve of the war. And it's the same thing. They want a treaty guaranteeing new borders and security arrangements for all of Europe, including Russia. Another and the final question that I want to touch upon today is the question that Lavrov raised about the United States. He basically said, look, the United States cannot position itself as a mediator and at the same time to be the enabler. And he said, I need open questions answered by the American side. Do they or do they not provide intelligence for Ukrainian strikes against Russia? Do they or do they not provide military war material to Ukraine? And if they do, why do they do it? From the point of view of Russia, it doesn't matter if they get paid or if they don't get paid. It is still American war material that is used to shoot at Russian targets. And that makes the US not an intermediary, but a party to the war. Uh, and then he also said a couple of uh, important things to the EU leaders. He repeated Putin's point that he made in Vladivostok, that EU rules are not international law, and that EU rules to intercept Russian shadow fleet is nothing short of piracy, because the international law supersedes whatever regulations EU makes, and seizing other countries' ships without declaring war is an act of piracy, and therefore Russia would do the same. If a Russian ship is seized, Russia would do the same. I devoted the entire previous video to that subject, but Lavrov repeated that. And so let me now conclude this presentation by saying that Russian actions have generated a kind of panic in Kiev, so much so that there is talk of overthrowing Zelensky. There are new demonstrations in support of Fyodorov, the former war minister, and there is Zaluzhny, who is trying to create support for himself um, to replace Zelensky. In other words, from the state of denial that anything's wrong, and claiming their victories and offensives and hitting Russia hard, Zelensky's regime is going into a state of panic. And what we're likely to see in the foreseeable future is the increasing crisis and a coming collapse of that regime in the coming, we shall see whether it would be weeks or months. Thank you very much, and please put a like if you do like it. Please subscribe to this channel. Please read if you're interested in reading some of the material I have on Substack. And also, I invite you to read my book, From Vladimir Lenin to Vladimir Putin, Russia in Search of Its Identity, which is on your screen now. Goodbye.